When my son chose her over me, I didn't cry. I just sat there in my little wooden chair by the window and watched him drive away. The road outside our home curved down the hill, and I could see the dust rise behind his car like a fading memory. He didn't look back that day, and somehow I knew he wouldn't not for a long time. You spend your whole life raising a child, giving them every piece of your heart, thinking that love alone will be enough to keep you close. But life has its own quiet way of teaching lessons you don't ask for, but still have to live through. My name is Martha, and this is the story of how I lost my son, not to death, but to distance, pride, and a love that slowly left no room for me. I live in a small town where everyone knows everyone, the kind of place where the church bell still rings every Sunday, and the smell of pies from the bakery floats down the main road by noon. My house sits on the edge of town, white fence, 2 rocking chairs on the porch, and a rose bush my late husband planted before he passed. It's quiet here, too quiet sometimes. After my husband Henry left this world, my son David became my reason to keep going. He was all I had, my laughter, my comfort, my purpose. I worked as a school secretary back then, not much money, but enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. Every evening, I'd see him come home from school with mud on his shoes and a grin on his face. He used to say, "Mama, one day I'll buy you a big house, one where you won't have to work anymore." I'd laugh and tell him, "This little house is big enough if it's full of love, David." And back then, it was. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Sundays meant church and dinner after roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and my apple pie. I can still hear the laughter echoing through the kitchen, the sound of his fork scraping the plate as he asked for seconds. Time has a way of slipping through your fingers. One day he's a boy who won't go to bed without a bedtime story, and the next he's packing his bags for college, standing in the same doorway where he took his first steps. That day I stood there too, smiling, pretending my heart wasn't breaking. "Mama, I'll call you every week," he said, and for a while he did. Every Sunday, right before dinner, my phone would ring. We'd talk about his classes, his friends, his new apartment. He sounded happy. I was happy too. Just hearing his voice was enough. But slowly those calls came less often. Then the visits started getting shorter. And then he brought her. Her name was Clara. Pretty girl, polite smile, city accent. She worked in marketing, always on her phone, always in a hurry. The first time I met her, I baked a pie apple, David's favorite. She said she was watching her sugar. That was the first time I felt the smallest distance. I remember noticing how David looked at her, that kind of admiration a man gives when he's in love. I was happy for him, truly. Every mother dreams of seeing her son find someone who makes him smile like that. But a small ache began that day, a quiet whisper that told me things were changing. Still, I tried my best to welcome her. I set the table with my nicest dishes, even brought out the lace tablecloth I'd been saving. But when dinner came, they spent most of the evening talking about their jobs, their city friends, the apartment they wanted to move into once they saved enough. I smiled, nodded, and kept pouring the gravy, though I could tell I didn't quite belong in their world anymore. After they left that night, I stood by the sink washing dishes alone. The plates clinked softly in the water, and I remember whispering to myself, "Don't take it to heart, Martha. This is what growing up looks like." But deep down, it already felt like losing him piece by piece. Months passed. They got engaged, then married. I wasn't part of most of the planning. I offered, of course, asked if I could help with the decorations or cook something for the reception. Clara thanked me, but said her event planner had everything under control. So I just smiled again. I'd learned that's easier than explaining the ache behind it. At the wedding, I sat in the second row, watching my son take vows with the woman he loved. I should have felt proud, and in a way, I did. But every time their eyes met, I noticed how far his gaze had moved from me. I clapped, smiled, and dabbed my eyes quietly with a napkin. When they danced their first dance, I whispered to myself, "You did it, Martha. You raised a good man." Still, when they drove off that night, the same road that led out of town, the same one Henry once took to work every morning, I felt something final, like a door had closed softly between us. After the wedding, I didn't hear much from them. At first, I excused it newlyweds, busy, settling in, but weeks turned into months. I'd send a message, sometimes a small note in the mail, a jar of homemade jam, a birthday card. Sometimes she'd reply. Sometimes she wouldn't. David always sounded distracted when he did call. Hey, Ma, sorry, been busy, work's crazy. We'll visit soon, I promise. But soon never came. I started keeping the porch light on at night, just in case they ever decided to stop by unannounced. It stayed on for years. Then one summer afternoon, I finally got the call they were coming to visit. I baked, cleaned, even changed the curtains. My heart felt light again. I imagined hearing his footsteps on the porch, his laughter filling the house again. But when they arrived, something felt different. Clara barely hugged me. She kept glancing at her watch, scrolling on her phone. David looked tired, thinner somehow. We sat down for dinner, and the silence between us said everything words couldn't. Then she said it. Martha, we've been thinking. Maybe it's better if you don't visit too often. David's really busy, and the city is different. She smiled politely, but her words stung sharper than any slap could. I looked at my son, waiting, hoping he'd speak up, but he didn't. He just looked down at his plate. That's when I realized he'd already chosen. I smiled instead of crying, because if I'd cried, I would have never stopped. That was the night I truly learned what silence can mean. After that night, things were never quite the same. The house felt emptier somehow, though it had always been quiet since Henry passed. Now, even the silence felt heavier, like it knew something had changed. For weeks after their visit, I replayed every moment in my mind, trying to find where I had gone wrong. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I didn't fit into their world anymore. Maybe I was just too old-fashioned for them. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself it was only a phase, that they'd come around eventually. But that hope, like a candle left in the wind, kept flickering smaller each day. David stopped calling. When I did hear from him, it was always brief, a rushed conversation between meetings or while he was driving somewhere. He always sounded distracted, polite, distant. Everything okay, son? I'd ask. Yeah, Ma, just busy. You know how it is. I wanted to say I didn't know how it was. My world was small, my garden, my knitting, my quiet mornings. His world was big, full of things I didn't understand anymore. Sometimes I'd make his favorite pie and sit at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. I'd imagine him there again, with that same boyish grin, crumbs on his shirt, laughing like he used to. Then I'd blink and the chair would still be empty. I started writing him letters, real letters, not messages. Each one was filled with small things: how the tomatoes were growing, how Mrs. Walker's cat had kittens again, how the church choir sounded prettier than ever this year. I never wrote about the loneliness. I didn't want him to feel guilty. Most of those letters never got a reply. Once in a while, a short text would come through. Thanks, Ma. That was all. I kept his every message, even the short ones. You hold on to what you can when you're a mother. One evening, I saw his car's picture on the local paper, not because of him, but because his company had sponsored a town event. The headline mentioned his wife's name, not his. She was the one in charge, the one with influence. I felt proud in a strange way, proud that my son had made something of himself, but beneath that pride, there was a quiet ache that never stopped growing. Months turned into years. I grew older, slower, softer. My knees hurt more when I got up in the morning, and my hands shook a little when I poured tea. Still, I waited for his visits. I told everyone in town, "Oh, David's just busy. He'll come by when he can." Even when I knew deep down that he probably wouldn't. On Christmas Eve one year, I decided to surprise them. I had baked cookies, wrapped a small gift, and even put on my best coat. I called ahead, but no one answered. So I told myself, it's fine, I'll just drop by. The drive took 2 hours, but my heart was light the whole way. I kept picturing his face when he opened the door and saw me there, his old mama with a tin of cookies, smiling like she used to. When I finally reached their building, I stood outside for a moment, watching the lights in the windows, families laughing, music playing. It reminded me of home the way we used to be. I rang the bell. Clara opened the door. Her smile was polite but tight, like she wasn't expecting me. "Oh," she said, "Martha, you didn't tell us you were coming." I smiled. "I called, dear, but maybe you missed it. I just wanted to drop these off. I baked David's favorite." She took the tin, holding it like it was something fragile. "That's very sweet of you. He's not home right now, though. He had to go to a work dinner." I nodded. "That's all right. I'll wait." She hesitated. Then she stepped aside and said, "Come in for a bit." Her home was beautiful, shining floors, big paintings, everything spotless, but it didn't feel warm. It didn't smell like home, no hint of cinnamon or wood or pie. Just clean air and silence. I sat on the edge of the couch while she poured me tea. We talked, but only about small things, weather, the holidays, her job. Every few minutes, she glanced at her phone. When David finally came home, he looked surprised to see me. Not happy, just surprised. "Ma, what are you doing here?" he asked, setting his coat down. I called, "Honey, I just wanted to see you for Christmas. I brought cookies." He gave me a tired smile. "Oh, Ma, you should have told me you were coming. We had plans tonight." I nodded. "That's all right, son. I'll just head home soon." He looked at Clara, then back at me. "It's a bit late for you to drive, isn't it?" I could feel the tension between them, unspoken, heavy. Clara touched his arm gently. "We'll call her a cab." Something in me broke a little then, not out of anger, but out of knowing that my presence had become an inconvenience in their lives. I smiled, even as my eyes burned. "It's fine. I'll drive carefully." He walked me to the door, hugged me briefly, and said, "Love you, Ma. We'll come by soon." I nodded. "I'll keep the porch light on." When I got home, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at that tin of cookies she'd handed back untouched. I realized they hadn't even opened it. Inside the house, the quiet felt louder than ever. The lights from the Christmas tree flickered softly, but even they seemed tired. That was the night I stopped pretending. I still loved my son more than anything, but I finally understood something that took me a lifetime to learn. You can't make someone stay, not even with love, not even when they're your whole world. I stopped calling after that. I stopped writing too, not out of anger, but out of peace. Sometimes silence is the only thing you have left to protect your heart. For a while, I kept expecting him to notice. Maybe he'd call one day asking why I hadn't written, but days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and there was no call. I started learning to live again quietly. I joined the church quilting group. I planted new flowers. I spent afternoons reading by the window instead of staring at the road. The ache was still there, but I learned to carry it differently, like an old scar that still aches when it rains, but no longer bleeds. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It was from David. The handwriting was familiar, shaky, rushed. He wrote, "Ma, I know I haven't been around. I'm sorry, things got complicated, but I miss you. Maybe I'll visit soon." It wasn't much, but I held that letter close to my heart. For the first time in a long while, I cried not from sadness, but from relief. I didn't know if he'd come, but I knew that somewhere deep down, a small part of him still remembered, and for me that was enough. The letter from David sat on my nightstand, and for days. I must have read it 100 times. The ink was smudged in places, maybe from his hand, maybe from mine. Every time I looked at it, my heart felt a little lighter just knowing he still thought of me. For weeks I waited. Every morning I'd sweep the porch, bake something new, and tell myself, maybe today. But days went by and there was no knock on the door. I didn't want to lose hope again, so I tried to let the waiting feel softer. I told myself that loving someone didn't mean needing them to show up every day. Sometimes love just meant being here steady, even when they weren't. Still, one afternoon in early spring, my phone rang. When I saw his name, my hands trembled. I took a deep breath and answered. "Ma," he said, his voice low, almost uncertain. "I was wondering if I could come by this weekend." I smiled so wide my cheeks hurt. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make your favorite pie." He chuckled softly. "You don't have to do that, Ma. I know, but I want to." That Saturday, I woke up early. I baked, cleaned, ironed the curtains, even polished Henry's old picture frame. The house smelled like cinnamon and soap like home again. When David's car pulled into the driveway, I almost didn't recognize him at first. He looked older, not just in age, but in the way life had shaped him, the faint tiredness in his eyes, the careful smile. He hugged me, and for a moment it felt like time had folded back on itself. My little boy was home, but when we sat down for tea, I noticed something in his expression. It wasn't just guilt, it was worry. "Ma," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." My hands froze around the teacup. "What is it, son?" He hesitated, looking down at the table. "Clara and I. We've been having problems. Things haven't been good for a while." I wanted to reach out and hold his hand, but I stayed still, letting him speak. "She doesn't want to live here anymore. She wants to move overseas, says it's better for her career. She asked me to go with her." I swallowed hard. "And what did you say?" He looked at me with tired eyes. I told her I needed time to think, but she said if I don't go, it's over. There it was, the choice again. Just like before, my son was standing at a crossroads and I was on one side of it. I tried to smile. "David, you've always been a good man. You'll do what's right for your life." He frowned. "I don't even know what that is anymore, Ma. I feel like I've been living someone else's dream, not mine." I took a deep breath. "Then maybe it's time you stop running after what everyone else wants. Sometimes peace isn't in big cities or fancy jobs. Sometimes it's just knowing where you belong." He didn't say anything after that. We sat in silence, sipping our tea. The house felt full again, but fragile, like one wrong word could make it crumble. That night I made him stay over. I set out fresh sheets, cooked a warm meal, and for the first time in years, I heard his footsteps upstairs again. I didn't sleep much. I just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, praying that somehow he'd find his way back, not just to me, but to himself. The next morning, he came down early. I was already in the kitchen kneading dough. He looked at me, then at the window where the first light of dawn touched the garden. "Ma," he said softly, "I don't deserve you." I turned, wiping my hands on my apron. "Don't say that, David. You're my son. There's nothing to deserve." He walked over and hugged me tight. I could feel his shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry for everything," he whispered, "for the calls I didn't make, for the times I didn't show up." I rested my hand on his back. "You came home, son. That's enough." But in my heart, I knew it might not last. Later that day, as he was leaving, he stood by the door a long while. "I'll call you soon, Ma," he said. I smiled. "I know you will." He got into his car, waved, and drove away. And just like the first time all those years ago, I stood at the window and watched the dust rise behind him. Only this time, something was different. This time, I didn't wait by the phone. Weeks passed. I heard nothing. Then one evening, I saw on the news that his company had moved its operations overseas. I didn't need anyone to tell me what that meant. He had gone with her. That night, I sat alone on the porch, the letter still in my pocket. I unfolded it slowly, read the same lines I'd memorized, and felt an ache so deep it almost didn't hurt anymore. It was too familiar. I realized that the hardest part of love isn't when someone leaves. It's when you finally accept that they won't come back. For days, I moved like a shadow through the house. I cooked out of habit, not hunger. I watered the plants, though I didn't care if they grew. I smiled at the neighbors, though my eyes felt hollow. Then one afternoon I found something that changed everything. It was an old box in the attic, covered in dust. Inside were letters, dozens of them, my letters, the ones I had sent him over the years, unopened, each one neatly stacked, tied together with a string. For a long moment I couldn't move. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. He hadn't even read them. I sat there holding those envelopes, realizing that all the love I had poured into them had never reached him. It had just sat in this box, forgotten. That was my breaking point. I didn't cry that day. I just sat there, feeling the quiet truth settle in my bones. Love, when it isn't seen, becomes a kind of ghost. It haunts only the one who gave it. That evening I burned those letters. One by one, not out of anger, but as a goodbye. I whispered to the flames, "You did your best, Martha. It's time to let go." As the smoke curled up into the night, I felt something loosen inside me, something that had been tight for too many years. I realized I couldn't keep living my life waiting for someone who had already moved on. My love for him would always be there, but it no longer needed to hold me prisoner. That was the night I chose myself. Quietly, finally, the morning after I burned those letters, the air felt different, lighter. I remember standing by the window, watching the sunrise stretch across the fields. The sky was soft pink and gold, the kind of beauty that doesn't ask to be noticed, it just exists. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with that heavy ache in my chest. There was still sadness, of course, that doesn't vanish overnight, but beneath it, there was something else, a quiet strength, a calm that felt almost new. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once waited for David's calls. This time I didn't wait for anything, I just sat, letting the warmth of the cup seep into my hands. That was when I realized peace isn't something you find, it's something you allow. I looked around my little kitchen, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel empty, it felt mine. The ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, the faded curtains, all of it had waited patiently for me to come back to myself. Later that week, I went through the rest of the attic. I sorted through old boxes, clothes, photographs. Each item carried a memory, some tender, some painful. I kept a few things that made me smile and let go of the rest. It felt like shedding an old skin. Among the things I found was a half-finished painting. I had started it years ago after Henry passed. It was meant to be of our garden in spring, but life had gotten in the way. The brushes were stiff, the colors dried. Still, I cleaned them gently and set everything on the dining table. That evening, I began painting again, slowly, quietly. The colors came alive under my hands, soft greens, warm browns, bits of yellow where the light touched. As the brush moved, I felt like I was breathing again. It became my routine. Every morning after breakfast, I'd paint. Sometimes the garden, sometimes the sky, sometimes just shapes and colors that made me feel something. I didn't paint for anyone else this time. I painted for me. Neighbors began to notice. One afternoon, Mrs. Turner stopped by with a basket of muffins. She saw the paintings lined up by the window and said, "Martha, these are lovely. You should show them at the community center." I laughed softly. Oh, I don't think anyone would care for an old woman's paintings. But she insisted, and a few weeks later I found myself at the local art fair, a small town gathering under a white tent with tables full of handmade crafts, pies, and quilts. I displayed 3 of my paintings. I didn't expect anything, I just wanted to share a little piece of my heart. To my surprise, people stopped to look. Some even asked questions, smiled, and said kind things. One woman said my painting reminded her of her grandmother's house. Another said it made her feel calm. That day, I realized that we touch people's lives in ways we don't always see. Even when we think our story is over, something beautiful can still begin. After that, I started attending more community events, the library reading club, the garden group. I found myself surrounded by kind faces, gentle laughter, and people who didn't see me as someone's mother, but as Martha. That name started to feel whole again. Every once in a while, I thought about David. I didn't check the news anymore or wait for letters. But sometimes I'd sit on the porch at sunset and whisper a small prayer for him, that he was safe, that he'd found peace in his own way. One day, months later, I received a postcard. It was from Paris. The handwriting was familiar. "Ma, I saw a painting today that looked just like your old garden. I couldn't stop thinking about you. I hope you're happy. Love, David." I smiled when I read it. There was no return address, no long explanation, just that short message. But it was enough. It told me he was alive, that he remembered, and most importantly, that he knew I was okay. I placed the postcard on the mantel next to Henry's picture. I didn't cry, I didn't ache, I just whispered, "Thank you, son." That night, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. The air smelled like rain, and the streetlights glowed softly on the wet road. I could hear the crickets, the distant bark of a dog, the rhythm of life carrying on. And I thought this is what healing looks like, not a sudden burst of happiness, not a grand revelation, just quiet acceptance. There were still lonely days, of course, days when I missed hearing his voice, when I caught myself setting an extra plate at the table out of habit. But those moments didn't break me anymore. They reminded me that love leaves marks, and that's not a bad thing. One afternoon, the community center invited me to teach a small painting class. I almost said no, but then I thought of all the people who had helped me find my way back, the neighbors, the kind smiles, the conversations over coffee. Maybe I could pass a bit of that on, so I agreed. My first class had 4 students, all older women like me, each carrying her own quiet story. We laughed, shared memories, and painted together. It wasn't about art, it was about connection. One woman, Helen, said something that stayed with me. She said, "You know, Martha, sometimes we think life stops giving after we lose too much, but maybe that's when it starts giving us ourselves." That night, I wrote her words down in my notebook. They felt true. Seasons changed. The house that once felt too big now felt just right. I planted flowers in the yard, marigolds, daisies, and lavender. The garden became my little sanctuary. Every time I looked at it, I thought of all the years I spent waiting for someone else to fill my life. And how, in the end, it was my own hands that did it. I began to travel a little too short trips with friends, nothing grand. We visited small towns, art fairs, and lakesides. I learned to laugh again. And each time I came home, I'd whisper, "See, Henry, I'm doing okay." The loneliness never vanished completely. I don't think it ever does, but it softened, became a companion instead of a wound. And I learned something I wish I had known earlier in life. We don't lose our worth when people walk away. We lose it only when we stop believing in it ourselves. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized how far I'd come. The same porch where I once waited for David now felt like a different place, not a station of waiting, but a seat of peace. The air was warm, the sky painted in shades of gold and purple. I held a cup of tea in my hand, the steam curling upward like a soft prayer. I thought about all the versions of me that had existed: the young wife, the hopeful mother, the grieving widow, the lonely woman, and now, this one, the woman who had finally learned that her own company was enough. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to be anyone else. Sometimes, when the nights grow quiet, I still find myself listening to the wind outside. It moves through the trees like a whisper, carrying the echoes of all the years that have passed. There are moments I still think of David, not with sorrow anymore, but with a tender ache that feels almost gentle. I imagine him older now, maybe with children of his own. I wonder if he ever tells them about the little white house on the edge of town, where his mother used to make apple pie and hum old hymns while folding the laundry. I hope he does, but even if he doesn't, that's all right. I've learned that love doesn't need to be seen to be real. It doesn't disappear just because it isn't returned the way we hoped. It simply changes shape, softens, settles, and becomes part of who we are. I used to think being alone meant being forgotten. Now I know it just means being free to rediscover the parts of myself I had tucked away. There's a strength in solitude, a quiet kind of courage that doesn't shout or demand to be noticed. It's in the way I make my morning tea, the way I water the garden, the way I sit in the sun and smile without needing anyone to see me. A few months ago, I received another letter. This time, it wasn't from David, it was from his daughter, Emily. My granddaughter, she must have found my address somehow. The envelope was pink, her handwriting small and neat. She wrote, "Grandma, Daddy told me you paint. Can you send me a picture of your favorite one?" I sat with that letter in my lap for a long while. My hands trembled not from age, but from the sudden flood of love I hadn't felt in years. I sent her a small painting the next day. It was of the rose bush Henry planted. Along with it, I wrote, "Dear Emily, this is a little piece of where I come from. Always remember love grows best in open hearts." Weeks later, I received a reply, a child's drawing of a house, 2 stick figures, and a big red heart in the middle. She'd written, "I love you, Grandma." I smiled for a long time after reading that. It felt like a circle had quietly closed, not perfectly, but tenderly. Life has a way of healing us when we stop chasing what hurt us. Sometimes the pieces we lose come back in unexpected forms: a letter, a smile, a small act of kindness that reminds us we were never really forgotten. Now, every evening, I sit on my porch with my sketchbook. I paint the sunsets, some soft and pale, others bold and golden, each one different, each one fleeting. I think that's what life is, really, a series of sunsets. Some you watch with someone's hand in yours, and others you watch alone. But each one is beautiful in its own way. People often say mothers never stop loving their children, and that's true. But what they don't tell you is mothers also need to love themselves again, especially after they've given everything away. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I'm grateful I learned it at all. So when people ask if I'm lonely now, I smile and say, "No, dear, just peaceful." Because peace, that quiet, steady kind, is the sweetest gift age has given me. I have no regrets anymore, only gratitude for the love I gave, for the lessons I learned, and for the woman I became because of them. If my story ever reaches someone who's sitting alone tonight, waiting for a call that doesn't come, I hope they hear this: you are not forgotten. You are not less because someone walked away. You still have a whole life waiting to be lived, and it's yours, entirely yours. I used to measure love by who stayed beside me. Now I measure it by how gently I carry those who didn't. And in that quiet truth I've found my freedom. So tonight, as I watch the sky turn from gold to gray, I whisper one last prayer, not for things to go back as they were, but for the courage to keep walking forward. And as the stars begin to appear, I smile because for the first time in a long, long while, I am exactly where I belong,